That's better.
Perfect.
So silence your phone.
So maybe we'll give people 2 or 3 more minutes to kind of find their way over here. If anyone else was accidentally finding the workshop link, just give people a couple minutes before we get started.
Dad, are you going first or me?
I don't know. I think it's up to them, whoever's
Okay.
going to introduce us.
You guys pick. Amy actually asked me that at dinner. Amy said, "Who's going first?" And I said, "Oh, well, they'll pick."
Who's on first?
I can go first, Dad. You're the closer. You're the elder closer.
I'm the snoozer.
I want to see Dad throw the alley-oop and son throw it down.
That probably could be arranged.
Shan, you look like a mountain. Normally, but
Thank you. I have transcended myself.
Okay.
we knew it was coming.
I'm in a restaurant, so I can't do my picture. But
We all knew it was on its way.
How's Shan?
hi, Todd. Hi, Noah.
How's it going, Shan?
Great. Glad you're doing this. Thank you.
Vegetable tempura or
Our
the
pleasure.
vegetable fried rice.
Mom's on as Mrs. Davis.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Davis.
Is she watching?
Yeah, she's watching.
Oh,
So just a reminder to everybody, I know you guys probably have your Zoom etiquette down by now, but as we get started, be sure to mute yourself. We'll have questions and answers afterwards, so be sure to unmute when there's Q&A. If you have trouble with your feed, I've been told that turning off your own video can help. So Todd and Noah, don't be offended if you see a lot of people turn their own video off. Leave your video on if you can, because it's nice to see audience reactions. But if you're having trouble with your feed, sometimes turning your video off can buy you a little bit of bandwidth, so that the person who's speaking you can see and hear better. That's your Zooming tip from the over 50 crowd. Well, we should go ahead and get started. I did want to say what a magnificent workshop we had this afternoon, and thank Todd and Noah for that. But I think the best way to probably say it is to quote, Amy was on, after we finished dinner, Amy checked in on Facebook, and I won't embarrass them and say who, but someone on Facebook already posted, that was the best visiting writer MFA workshop I've ever been to. So the word is already out. All I want to say about tonight's reading, and I'm going to hand you over to the introducers, is that the genesis for tonight's reading was last year when I taught one of Todd's books to my graduate workshop, and I was teaching the book for purely selfish reasons. I allow myself one book or so a class when I teach a bunch that's just really home base for me, and then I do my duty and think, okay, well, what are other good books that maybe aren't so much home base for me, but might be home base for my students. And immediately there was a large lobbying effort began. And then that lobbying effort even picked up more steam when folks started reading Noah's book, which we have in class this quarter as well, to have them. So this is a student generated event. The students really wanted these folks, which thrilled me because Todd and Noah have joined my personal canon of living poets who mean a very, very great deal to me personally now. So I'm just really thrilled about this event. So after each Todd and Noah each will read about 25 minutes, pardon me, and then we've got some time for Q&A, and then we're going to leave this Zoom open, and Holly has graciously volunteered to be our hostess for tonight. So she's got a few ideas. That way it's not just like the same three people speaking on Zoom the whole time. She's got a few icebreakers and ideas about how we can make sure everybody gets a chance to get to know one another and visit. So thank you for that, Holly. So do we decide that Noah's going first? Is that right?
Sure.
So I'll mention both people are going to introduce right away, so that I don't have to say anything again. So later, when Todd reads, Todd will be introduced by Danny Torpy, and Danny's a second-year MFA poet from Wyoming, and was one of the two spearheads in the lobbying effort to get these poets here tonight. So then to introduce Noah will be Sarah Hammond. Sarah's from Northern Idaho and also a second-year poet. And I think it was out of her mouth first when we read Native Species last year, Todd's 5th book, that we should invite the two of them. So I asked these guys to write the introductions. And I just wanted to once again thank Todd and Noah. Every once in a while, you come across writers who give you renewal. Renewal for yourself as an artist, renewal for the art that you do. And the two of you guys, both in your class tonight, in your new friendship that we formed, and most of all, in your words on the page, have renewed me for poetry at a time when I really needed it. I haven't needed renewing this bad in many years. So you guys have helped me in ways beyond what you can probably even imagine. All right, Sarah, so tell us about Noah.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. But I am delighted to introduce our first reader for the evening, Mr. Noah Davis. Mr. Davis grew up in central Pennsylvania between the low Appalachian Mountains. An important note considering his debut book, Of This River, has everything to do with nature and both the human and non-human species that inhabit it. But before I get too far into gushing about the book, let me share a bit about Mr. Davis. He earned his MFA from Indiana University just this year, I believe, and has been published in numerous literary magazines, including the North American Review and the Atlanta Review. He has also received Pushcart Prize nominations for poetry from both Poet Lore and Natural Bridge. And in 2019, he was selected as the winner of the Emerging Wheelbarrow Books Poetry Prize for his collection Of This River. So like Jonathan mentioned, my first encounter with Mr. Davis's new book was in our MFA poetry workshop back in October. Our cohort had read and loved his father, Mr. Todd Davis's book previously. So we were really excited to see what Noah Davis's book would be like. I believe when I came to class for the discussion of that book, the first words that came out of my mouth were something like, "I am so jealous by this collection of poems," because he weaves myth, crafting, and natural imagery together perfectly, something I desperately try to achieve in my own work. So naturally, I was a bit envious of the book. Mr. Davis's collection chronicles the human and non-human worlds that coexist along the image of the central river running through the book. The poems capture the found intersections between these worlds and share what it means to live in a setting that has been devastated by climate change, strip mining, and hyperconsumerism. While reading the book, I found the meditations on the images of violence and love, both human and non-human, to be one of these intersections. The moments of the short-haired girl that dive into the river, hits her head on a rock, and drowns, and the black bear carcass hung nose down in the garage, interwoven with the moments of the short-haired girl feeding cornbread to the hogs, and the coyote that shows a deep love for his brother, testify that all life is interwoven. It is absolutely beautiful, and it needs to be remembered and protected. Mr. Davis's ability to craft modern mythology through found folklore, natural geography, and the lives of the people that share this community has contributed to a collection that I will constantly return to for inspiration, think about, and envy for a really long time. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Noah Davis.
Oh my goodness, Sarah. Thank you very much. That was pretty incredible to hear all those things. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you very much to Jonathan. And thank you very much to the workshop that I got to spend the afternoon and evening with. This is a little surreal for me, and a little bit like a dream come true. Just graduating from the MFA and getting to talk to all these poets again really makes me happy. So thank you. Thank you. I think tonight might be, at least for my reading, is probably just going to be a whole bunch of homesick poems. I moved to the Missoula, Montana this year, and it was after I got married, and it has just been wonderful to be living out west, but home is a very special place for me, and all these poems were born out of home. And so this first poem, I think this first poem is a little bit universal. If you lived in a place where there was a bridge and there was a river, you probably jumped off of it or knew of some people that jumped off the bridge into the river. And so we'll start off with one of those poems. Small Histories. At the bridge above the town, boys dare each other to dive into the green water and swim inside the fossil of a refrigerator dumped in this river so long ago, stone has grown around the open door. Carp shadows quiver the white metal while boys try to judge light and current's path. They bring rocks flecked with mica, rusted railroad spikes, elk antlers, offerings with weight to take the boys down to where they can swim below the river's flow and exchange their gifts with those boys before them have left. The teeth of so many dogs, a bag of brass rifle shells, a crow's wing wrapped in bike chain and tied to a horse's jaw. And there are parts about home too, not only that you long for, but that you're continually thinking about and that just fascinate you. And I think, particularly with growing up in Appalachia, folklore is such an important part of it. And Sarah mentioned a little bit the found folklore, but so much of this book is taking that old folklore that I grew up with, was internalized in my community, and trying to reshape it and make sense of it. And today, maybe I should stop referencing the workshop today, but it was such a wonderful conversation. Today we talked about why we write poems, and so many people talked about making sense of the world, or how we interact with the world. And this next poem is really one of those ways. If you don't know that much about Appalachian folklore, one aspect within birthing folklore is that if a birth is taking a little too long, if there are complications starting to occur because of the extended time, people would wrap timber rattlesnake skins around the mother's thigh to make sure to get the baby out quickly. The idea that a baby knows that a snake is bad and so wants to get out and away from it. And that, I think, holds a lot of issues that we have with instilling fear at a very early age in the natural world. And so what does that do if we can continue to move forward and look at that in different ways? Skins. In this valley, where mules catch pigeons in their mouths, women wrap rattlesnake skins around their daughters' thighs, while babies wail out from their red rooms. Come wailing out and away from these snake skins in the fear strongest when we can only see shapes. And the fear lives in these shapes until one day in January, these babies, who have grown into children carrying their own fear, hike to a talus slope and with axes chop away a chestnut stump, where they find 30 rattlesnakes curled and cold and kill every one of them. These babies, grown large enough to carry dead snakes in their hands, lay the snakes on the snow in shapes only hawks can read. In this valley, where bees build honeycomb between railroad ties, Women wrap rattlesnake skins around their daughters' thighs while babies wail out from their red rooms. When the babies are teething, these mothers lay rattlesnake skins on swollen gums. These babies grow into children who know what it means to have rattlesnake skins in their mouths, which they remember as they hike through groves of bare oak and hear the snake's metallic buzzing and speak to the snake in a way only bodies who have been together since breath began know how. In this valley, where bears walk upright on the road, women wrap rattlesnake skins around their daughters' thighs while babies wail out from their red rooms. The mothers wipe mucus and blood from their babies' cheeks and bellies with the rattlesnake skins. And because the skins of these babies are new, the scales mark their cheeks and bellies until fathers come and scrub away the divoted prints. When these babies grow into girls and boys who want hands to touch them, they recognize who else was born in this valley by rubbing their hands over cheeks and bellies and finding the keratin memory of rattlesnake scales left by mothers. So whenever you're looking at poems and you're trying to figure out how they're going to fit in a manuscript or into a book, it's really nice to have good mentors. And one of my good mentors was Adrian Matika at Indiana University. And the book that my manuscript had been accepted. There was 2 weeks before I had to send in the final draft. And he had read it and he was going to give me comments for the last just finishing touches. And he told me that there was a poem missing. There was a poem where a short-haired girl, it had to be explained how she could talk to animals, because there are different poems where she does this. And he's like, but we don't know how she can do it. And I was like, Adrian, it's 2 weeks before I have to send it in and it's there. And he's like, don't worry about it, just write the poem. And so I'm going to read you the poem that was that was written 2 weeks before the final draft was due. So thank you to Adrian Matika, wherever he is right now. Learning to talk to animals as told by short-haired girl. I'm skinny and won't show my front teeth if I don't have to. But today, after I broke the stalk of a touch-me-not, just how Witch James showed me, I swallowed the plant's balm and talked for the first time to a deer by the river. Our speaking made me love my tongue more than any sun-warmed tomato, more than any ground-cold carrot. The doe told me she hid her fawn by a hobble bush, and I said I wouldn't go look. But while she walked into the field to eat, I snuck and found the child sleeping. I went back to the river before the doe crossed again. I'll hold this lie close, like the teeth in my head. And right, if we learn to talk to animals, we'd lie to them eventually, right? That's only, it's only human. It's only human. Hunting seasons are going on all around America. Montana's rifle general season ended last weekend. Pennsylvania's rifle season began last weekend. And so hunting's been on my mind. I've been doing a lot of hunting here in Montana, and I've been hunting ever since we moved to Pennsylvania back when I was 8 years old. And so it's been something that I've thought a ton about and written a lot about, and what I spend a lot of time doing. And to behold making meals from the woods is definitely something. And so Short-Haired Girl is the really the backbone character of this entire collection, but there are many different characters that surround Short-Haired Girl, and one is her brother. And I like a beholding poem sometimes where our speaker is beholding something that is strange to them or is new. And so this is from Short-Haired Girl's brother's perspective. Short-Haired Girl's brother watches her gut a deer. Steam lifts around her face from the deer's open body, like she's lifted the lid from a pot of beans. I haven't killed my first deer yet, haven't been inside any other body but my own. I move closer to the warmth, her red arms flaked with white belly hairs shaved loose by the knife. She pulls the heart, lungs, and liver from the hole she's hacked in the body. I ask her what she feels when she's elbow deep. She says, like us, they're made of water. I really don't want to do a word search for how many times I used water in this collection, but it would be an obscene amount. And if anybody would have done it, I think they would have told me to cut back some, but I feel like my life is totally woven by water. I grew up along the Lowell Juniata River, which runs through the back of my neighborhood, but then there were dozens of small streams above our house where I explored and learned a lot. And I think it would have been impossible for me not to think about just water and how it connects with everything. And then being somebody who's interested in the woods and eating, I don't know, you can't talk to a country person, I think, in the world without them talking about how, oh, well, it tastes like the water. And, you know, if you eat fish, it tastes like the water, and whatever the animals are drinking, they taste like the water too. And so it's such an elemental thing. But yeah, this next poem is not about water. So this next poem is actually a dream poem. And I don't know, I love dream poems. And I hope everybody writes dream poems and listens to their dreams. This one came to me over 3 different nights in a week, which really made me distrust the poem, because how the heck could it happen that quickly or easily? This is a running title. So the title is In Fields Where Junco. In fields where junco wings strike goldenrod stalks in the dark, my future child visits. Her mouth opens and closes while 2 basswood trees on the hill mark each other's trunks. Wind swirls clockwise to their crowns. I say, widowmaker, and she, not before morning. So we wait together until the limbs long ago broken and caught dead in the canopy fall to earth, where storms also collapse. I don't know. I hope everybody's been able to see a storm collapse like on a ridge or a mountain, but it's just one of the most incredible things how clouds can just kind of just fall away and crumble around that. I'm going to read a love poem because I think every reading needs to have a love poem. And I don't know. Don't tell like all the other poets that, but I just think that. This one, I don't know how you all grad students are still going on, but I was always trying to save every single penny, so I never put on the heat, which is good and it was fine because I lived in Southern Indiana for my grad school, and it got snow like 4 times a year, so it was all good. But my apartment was so terribly drafty. And so I remember having to put towels in the cracks all around. So and then it wouldn't draft through and hit me in the back of the head at 2 a.m. But I wanted to put that into a poem so badly. And I was like, I think that could be a love poem. I think that could start a love poem. So we'll see. Oh, and my wife's right over here. And she's very upset that I showed her, but I had to, you know, she was in the room. February new moon. After fitting rags into the cracks around the door with a butter knife, I sit on the couch next to you and begin the story of following the bobcat's tracks to where he fell through the river's ice. But you kiss me with your tea-warm mouth before I can draw the blue outline of the hole with my finger on your wrist. I keep my eyes open as you remind me that we are all taught certain contours before this life, even while the moon is young and has no light to give. How much more time do I have for this? Do I have time for two more poems? Two more poems. Okay. It's a lot of people have been asking me like what's your favorite poem in the collection, and that's not a stupid question, but I think it's a very tough question to ask for particularly a book of poems, but I have been asked that a lot, and I've been thinking this isn't my favorite poem, but I think it might be the thesis poem, which maybe also is stupid to say for me to say that there's a thesis poem in a book of poems. But I think this one catches the essence of Short-Haired Girl in as much of a way as one poem can. Short-Haired Girl praises a child on a horse. When I see a child sitting on a horse, I believe for a moment they are the same animal, like owls sleeping in larch trees, like geese resting between cattails. I believe this more if the child isn't wearing a shirt, like hummingbirds sipping cardinal flowers, like dragonflies drying wings on laurel. If they cross a river, the child and horse become even closer, a single wet body, like bees trembling spice bush, like lacewings climbing moss. Out of the river, water drips down the child's legs and over the horse's stomach. River water becomes child's water. Child's water becomes horse's water. Water must return to earth, like all children and their horses. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I got one more poem, and yes, just thank you again for this really wonderful opportunity. First reading out of this book, so never gonna forget it. Never really gonna forget it. I'm gonna end with the last poem in the collection. It's a good thing this isn't prose, so then I'm not telling you the very end, you know, of a novel or something. So you can still end with the last poem. This poem has an epigraph from Judges chapter 14, verses 8 and 9. Samson turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, and in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. He scooped out the honey with his hands and ate as he went along. Short-haired girl stops going to church. My donkey Dame's Rocket, found a goat's skull in the back pasture. She carried it to me in her mouth, and I nailed the bone above the door of her shed. She admired the skull like I admire antlers. Bees waxed honeycomb in the eye sockets, and amber bulged over the nose where the lower jaw used to be. Honey dripped from the skull onto Dame's Rocket. She licked the sweet from her muzzle. The bee's hum settled in the darkest hair lining her shoulders, and I felt the whir in my legs when I rode her around the yard. 2 months ago, I woke before the bees and sat in front of Dame's Rocket's shed. I waited there for her to stand below the bone hive. Dozens of bee bodies, barely large enough to catch the light, slanted around her head, golden buzzing like the hymns at church that made me cry. I stood and reached for the bone hive the same way Thomas must have reached into his Savior's ribbed hive. The honey was bee warm on my fingers, and I tasted the sweetness forever and ever. Amen. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, I think it's my turn. Well, thank you so much, Noah. That was awesome. And it's so fun to hear a fellow poet in their first collection. That's so exciting. So hopefully some of us get to that point in our career. So next, I'm going to introduce his father, who started this mission for us at EWU. We were really excited when we got to read the assigned reading from Jonathan, and then be able to read it again this year with the first year poets. So Todd Davis has a laundry list of books and awards, so I'm going to start into that. He is the author of 6 full-length collections of poetry, including Native Species, Winterkill, In the Kingdom of the Ditch, The Least of These, Some Heaven, and Ripe, as well as limited edition chapbook, Household of Water, Moon, and Snow. He edited the nonfiction collection Fast Break to the Line Break, Poets on the Art of Basketball, and co-edited the anthology Making Poems. His writing has won the Midwest Book Award, the Gwendolyn Brooks Poetry Prize, and the Chautauqua. Can you help me with that one, Todd? I'm so sorry.
No problem. Chautauqua.
Chautauqua, thank you. I even practiced and I still slaughtered it, so I'm really sorry about it. The Editor's Prize, the Bloomsburg University Book Prize, and the Forward Indies Book of the Year Silver and Bronze Awards. His poems appear in such noted journals and magazines as American Poetry Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, Barrow Street, Iowa Review, North American Review, Missouri Review, Gettysburg Review, Orion, Poetry Northwest, West Branch, Sycamore Review, and the Poetry Daily. He currently teaches environmental studies, creative writing, and American literature at Pennsylvania State University, Altoona College. So with Todd Davis in our cohort, a little bit of background information. Our poetry cohort is from all over the place. We have people from Idaho and Washington, but we have people from Florida, Wyoming, Oregon, California even. So after reading his work, we've all been able to identify our own backyards within his work, no matter where we're at, even though he's from and genuinely writes from the soul in Pennsylvania. So writers in our program from all over are reminded that our backyard can be written with precision. With this year making so many of us feeling isolated and confined to small spaces, poets like Davis make our little corners of the earth feel expansive with opportunity. To quote a stanza from his poem Salvinius Fontinius, also known as Brook Trout, so many of us have the urge to travel long distances, to escape the place where we were born, to find ourselves consigned to. I don't drive my pickup more than 10 miles in any direction. The news of the universe I'm interested in is written on the sides of these fish. And even though in the most unusual times we are thankful for artists like Davis to remind us that inspiration can be found just around our corner. His collections have taught us all to be bold when writing about heartbreak and to seek mystery, even though mystery may be unanswered, and give great consideration to all that surrounds us in a particular space. So if you're all ready, we would love to hear from Mr. Todd Davis.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I appreciate it. And a big thank you to Jonathan for reading my books and then sharing them with his students. And thanks to all you students in the workshop for trusting your poems with Noah and me today and talking about poems. My most recent book, Native Species, begins with an epigraph from a poet of the Pacific Northwest, William Stafford. And Stafford wrote, what I believe is all animals have one soul. As you heard, I am a professor of environmental studies here at Penn State. That's the program that brought me here. And I'm the son of a veterinarian, the grandson of farmers. And I lament the way that we have treated the earth. I lament even more the staggering separation that has occurred between all of us and the earth and the ways we live now. It makes me fear for the future. And I just think, there's so much that we could learn from Native peoples, from indigenous peoples here, not to co-opt their knowledge, but to be guided by them. And one of those things is to remember that there's the more than human natural world that we share this place with, and it's a sacred thing. So the book Native Species has a lot of interspecies happening. So I'll begin with one of those poems. It's called Almanac of Faithful Negotiations, and it has an epigraph from a classical Chinese poet, Du Fu. Here at the edge of heaven, I inhabit my absence. On the first day, we find evidence of elk, but not the elk themselves. On the second, we see the charred and blackened sleeves, fire leaves, but not a single flame. By the third day, the oldest trees have already ascended, but the microbial mouths buried in the dirt remain. After 4 days, our minds flood with rivers and creeks, and we find it hard to speak, except in mud and stone. On the fifth, ravens decorate a white oak snag, croaking in the voices of our drunk uncles, reminding us whose house we live in. 6 days gone, a fisher stands on hind legs, stares across the meadow's expanse, dares us to approach the porcupine corpse, muzzle red with the body's sugar. When the last day comes, only minutes before dawn, susurration of wind, stars moving back into the invisible, all of us wondering when we will join them. Next poem I'll read is Goat's Milk. My wife loves soap, and she likes artisan-made soap. And as the crow flies, it's probably about 2.5, 3 miles to the edge of 41,000 acres of game lands here that go up the Allegheny front, where Noah and I spend most of our time. And right before you get to the game lands, there is a farm. I actually had the woman who has the goat farm. I had her daughter in our environmental studies program. I lift weights at the rec center with her cousin. Her grandfather has the barn right next to their property. It's the Cherry family. And so that's where my wife gets her goat's milk soap. And that's what inspired this poem, Goat's Milk. The bells up and down the ridges wander through the small window in the kitchen wall. The girl who makes soap and fudge from goat's milk to sell to tourists who come for the fall foliage is trying to describe for her mother, who is deaf, what it sounds like when she slides her fingers along the slick udder and milk spurts from the goat's nipple. She makes no mention of the goat kid they found mostly eaten in the rocks, how she took the bell from around its neck and washed the blood from the shiny metal with the hose at the side of the house. Her father and brother want to kill the coyote that did this, and part of her wants that too. She forms words with her hands, gestures to her mother, and says with silent lips the word red, because milk sounds alive to her. And next the words water and stone, because the stream running from the woods and into their pasture resembles the clattering of hooves. The last word she mouths, wrist turning over the expression like needles knitting wool, is risk. The swish, swish of milk circling the bottom of the pail. A single goat neglected by her brother who brought the herd from the far meadow. The parting of grass as a paw pads the soft turf, and the bleat from the back of a goat's throat, moaning first out of hunger, then out of fear. A lot of my poems do end in sorrow or suffering or death, and I even get tired of writing such poems. And so I'm going to read you a poem called Cracks. It's born out of my youth in northern Michigan. I grew up right on the border, in northern Indiana. I grew up right on the border of Indiana and Michigan in an area called Michiana. My house was 2 miles from the Michigan line. And it's a glaciated area and lots and lots of lakes there. And ice fishing is a winter pastime. And as I got to the end of this poem, I had a decision to make. And so you'll see the decision. Cracks. A pickup slips over the ice, rear tires spinning, turning a circle, then another, a series of donuts in a mechanical dance that causes the 3 boys to swear and laugh, spilling beer onto their laps and the seats that already stink of cigarettes and sweat. Their dads and uncles sit in hastily erected shacks, hovels spread across the lake, humped over like dirt at the entrance to gopher dens. They fish in the half light of heaters, drinking schnapps and whiskey, readying themselves for the rod to bow, hovering over an augured hole as if it were a nest in need of guarding. When at last the line jerks down into the dream of a northern pike, they fumble with the reel, hearts racing ahead of an ending they imagine will be told at the bar on a Saturday in June. Glasses of beer sweating, hands spread wide in a lie to suggest the size of the fish whose head sprang from the slush-filled abyss, only to escape their grip into the black depths of late December. Air snakes through the truck's cab, windows rolled down so these bored boys can scream at the stars salted across the sky. Most of the men have gone to eat supper, to watch the Lions lose one more game on TV. The smell of propane lingers, stirred with the beer the boys burp as they smoke cigars and cough. They've parked the truck at Ralph's shanty, and the older brother spits into a plastic jug, snuff stuffed under his lower lip, as he tells stories about a buck he killed in October and a girl he dated from the next town over with a mouth as soft as velvet. There are always cracks in the ice, but trying to decide which seam is harmless and which leads to the bottom is a matter of luck. They've grown accustomed to the lake's groaning, having heard its teeth chatter since they were children. Sun melting into the horizon, everything refreezing in a slick swatch of darkness. Toward the south end of the lake, springs thin the ice, but the boys believe the cold ensures their passage. On the way back, a wheel breaks through, front end dipping, the entire truck tipping, then plunging forward like a duck, tail feathers pointed at the moon. Every year, some drown, and even more trucks sink. But tonight, with the windows open, each boy places a foot on the seat and leaps to safety, rolling onto their sides, praying the ice shelf will hold. The sound of the truck being sucked beneath the surface is smothered by their happy hollering. None of them thinking about the cost when Szymanski's towing sends a diver down with a cable and hook, or how their mothers will cry as their dads berate such stupidity, which of course is inherited. For now, they can only hoot at their own good fortune. Cold stars warmer with their escape, sparkling like the fake diamonds they give to girlfriends on 6-month anniversaries, the moon offering just enough light to help them to shore, and to the county road they'll walk all the way back to town. So I'm glad those young men survived my poem. As I was growing up, my mother often told me how much she loved me, which hopefully you all had at least one parent who often told you how much they loved you. But along with those stories of how much she loved me, she would tell stories of 2 miscarriages. She had a miscarriage with her first pregnancy, and then she had my sister, and then she had a miscarriage with her 3rd pregnancy, and then she had me. And she wanted to have a large family, and she, as I said, would tell me these stories and was very overprotective, very afraid that something would happen to me, that I might die. And those stories haunted me, and they come to fruition in a poem. The title reads into the first line. In the 7th month, my mother worries whether I will be lost too. Her heart heated, banging against the trellis of her chest like the pie tins she ties to stakes in the garden to frighten crows and deer, the soft nibbling mouths of rabbits that eat each green shoot. And though she didn't mean for it to happen, she thinks she somehow betrayed my brother and sister, expelled them to small graves at the back of the family plot to listen to the harsh whispering of the wind in the yew tree's branches. She'd hoped for children to grow older with, muddy feet to walk the rows, small hands pulling weeds, arms filled with baskets of potatoes and carrots, the rutabagas and beets carted to the cellar, the thick stalks of broccoli that remind her of the ash trees where grackles roost, calling to one another in a voice like her own mother's, asking for something other than the bitter taste of kale melted in broth made of creek water and chicken bones. In the shadows of her lungs, I hold my breath, crouch behind her spleen, willing my heart to be still, telling it to beat quietly while she begs me to stay, imploring me to nudge her rib, to turn over in my sleep so she knows I want to be with her, so she can be assured my brother and sister will not come in the night to take my hand, to drag me beneath newly turned earth, ready for planting. Ghosts in the family, right? My father grew up in Appalachia in Kentucky. My grandparents were poor subsistence farmers there. And they were part of a religious denomination called Separate Baptists. And Separate Baptists were a bit like Shakers in the sense that they had two doors, one for men to go in, one for women to go in. And men would sit on one side of the congregation and women on the other side. Unlike Shakers, who died out because, of course, they didn't believe in procreation, Separate Baptists did. So there was a sparking bench in the back of the church in the middle, and sparking meant you were dating. So you could sit together before you got married, just not after you got married. And he would tell me these stories. He also went to a one-room schoolhouse. And so this is a poem I wrote after his death, imagining what his first kiss must have been like. And there are many species in here, and I won't begin to name them all, but there is a species of flower native to that region that colloquially is called rabbit tobacco that he told me how in their corn cob pipes they would smoke. So this is called First Kiss. She spoke with the voice of an egret, skin swirled with the smell of rabbit tobacco. He hid in honeysuckle to watch her catch dragonflies, blue-green matchsticks with wings glistening like wax paper. Mamaw called them snake doctors, claimed they'd follow all manner of slithering, stitch them back together when they were riven by a shovel or hoe. The boy snared rat snakes, allowed them to slip around his wrist and elbow, circle his waist. When the girl passed on the path between fields or walking to town along the wagon road, he thought of wind unsettling muslin, the first hint of darkness on the threshing floor. She bent to his ear in church, croaked about the feathers of red-winged blackbirds, how they resembled the leather covers of a Bible, their whistle song like the secrets inked on onion skin paper. The morning she took his hand on the way to the schoolhouse, pulled him under the bent down branches of a hedge apple and kissed him, pecking at his lips like a flicker grubbing a snag. He remembered the preacher pushing his head backward in the tank of water, hollering to the congregation that he was saved. And I do think, right, a first kiss must be like a good baptism, must be like a good baptism. And this semester I was teaching a course here, a 400 level course called Creative Writing in the Natural World for our environmental studies majors. And one of my students asked me if it was true that the pileated woodpecker's tongue, which grubs the snags, in my poem, it's a northern flicker, if it was true that its tongue was so long that it then, when retracted, had to wrap around its skull. And that's true. So that's some kiss. I'll read you the title poem of this book. It's called Native Species. And I'm going to hold up for folks. This is a painting by Winslow Homer. And I just love it. And I've had since I was a boy because of the overtones of Narcissus in it. You know, we think, right, often that we mammals are the only ones that are narcissistic, like to look at ourselves, our reflections. I don't know if you've ever watched other animals watch themselves. Now, they may not recognize it as themselves, but they become transfixed with that. And so here's a poem about somebody sort of like me, Native Species. At work, he found himself looking at paintings of deer on the internet, some dead, some dying, others resting in tall grass or beneath green boughs, the gentle sound of water rolling over stone in the stream that bordered the picture and flowed out of the frame. Tracking a doe through briar and multiflora rose, he'd feel the ease of the deer's movements, the muscle that shaped kinship with the mountain. For him, the trail was precarious, one boot in front of the other as he scaled steep talus or sunk to his waist in the sloggy alder swamps where many took refuge, cold, soaking skin, changing his own scent. While laboring with a meat saw, he protested that he loved what he killed, offering elaborate prayers of thanksgiving for the animal that fed his family. When winter grew deep, he found the earthen bowls where they slept, heat of their bodies melting snow, and close by a shed antler, like a crown removed before sleep. Trimming a hangnail, he began to suspect something. Plate dark and thick, black as bituminous coal. He told his wife he'd banged his fingers in a door, but soon his toes divided as well, 3 to one side, 2 to the other, a slant with angular curves that made wearing shoes impractical. His wife insisted he see a doctor. Instead, he went to the woods, where his back bent and lengthened, neck drawn out, eyes brought to the side, dusky and knowing. Still, she recognized him, clasped his face under the muzzle, scolded him for procrastinating, while pressing her forehead to his, stroking the coarse hair along his chest and belly. During rifle season, when the family heard a shot roll up the valley, they ran to the porch and called his name, waiting for the comfort of a tail's flash along tree line. His sons were careful to mark the shape of the ivory patch at the base of his throat and swore only to hunt squirrel and rabbit. His daughter, who loved to ride his shoulders, tied yellow yarn from his brow tines in a cat's cradle. Beneath moonlight, on late summer evenings, he ate the beets and clover she planted in the garden, stamped his hoof in dark soil until a face appeared at the window to look down on velvet antlers, illuminated like branches in wet snow. I've had the good fortune for the last decade to head out to Montana, most often with Noah, a couple of trips by myself. And I love that he lives in Missoula now. And dear sweet Nakia, his wife, let me come all of 3 weeks after they got married and steal him away for 2 weeks to be in 3 different wilderness areas. And I fell in love with the anaconda pentler. But this is a poem from a Western vantage point, and it's called Gnosis, that word, that spiritual word, Gnosis. In a blue river made of snowmelt that forms this valley of aspen and alder, I fish with my sons until summer's light fades in the recesses of a canyon. While hunting alone, I entered a small cave to take shelter from a passing squall and found the bones of a bear cub curled in a circle of trust. Someday, when the white fields disappear and only rain falls from the heavens, this river will vanish too. The trout we catch have throats that shine with a bright red mark, suggesting the role blood plays in betrayal. A woman who is long dead told me that when a river passes away, it holds the memory of itself in the silt left behind. When our species is extinct, what animal will carry the memory of our lives? Noah said poetry readings need love poems. So here's a love poem of sorts. It's called Returning to Earth. It begins with an epigraph by the Polish poet Czesław Miłosz. Trust in the light that shines through earthly forms. Yeah, not to preach, but you remember Stafford's line, right? Line about our soul. All animals share one soul. Trust in the light that shines through earthly forms. I can't think of a wiser thing to say, and I thank Milos for it. Returning to Earth. At the bottom of an abandoned well dug more than a century ago, the moon rises from the center of the earth, a crust of ice forming around its edges. The stand of larch outside our bedroom window sways, golden needles stirring the air underneath its boughs. I open the window to hear the river sailing away, riding the stone boat of the basin carved by spring floods. Beyond the faint light of a candle, your voice asks if we might touch and remember how our children were made, how the bodies of our parents were returned to earth. I want our children's hands to hold the river, to watch it spill through their fingers back to a source older than our names for God. Beneath a waxing moon, we've witnessed animals dragging their dead into the light. Tonight, we imagine some suckling their young who are born blind in these coldest months. Soon the river will freeze, and come morning, we'll break the ice in the well so we may drink. In dark shelter, I place the words of a prayer upon your tongue. You are gracious, saying the prayer back into my waiting mouth. And I've loved my dear wife for a long time. I met her when I was 12 years old. She moved into our school district in 7th grade, and I had a crush on her. From that moment to this moment, I sure expect it to go forward from this point on. She didn't date me until our the summer after our senior year in college, but we were engaged within 3 or 4 months because we'd been best friends all along. And Noah's the result of that union. And let me see here. Yep, it'll be 33 years this June. So we're at 32 and a half or so. So I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful for all of you for listening to poems. And I'll close with a poem called Thankful for Now, which has Noah's brother in it as well, Nathan. The blessing of a good marriage and children is the greatest riches I can imagine. So thankful for now. Walking the river back home at the end of May, locusts in bloom, an oriole flitting through dusky crowns, and the early night sky going peach, day's late glow, the color of that fruit's flesh, dribbling down over everything, christening my sons, the two of them walking before me after a day of fishing, one of them placing a hand on the other's shoulder, pointing toward a planet that's just appeared, or the swift movement of that yellow and black bird disappearing into the growing dark. And now the light, pink as a crabapple's flower, and my legs tired from wading the higher water, and the rocks that keep turning over, nearly spilling me into the river, but still thankful for now when I have enough strength to stay a few yards behind them, loving this time of day that shows me the breadth of their backs, their lean, strong legs striding, how we all go on in this cold water, heading home to the sound of the last few trout splashing as mayflies float through the shadowed riffles. Thanks.
Todd and Noah said they'd be glad to take some questions. I just wanted to make a quick announcement first. Our brother poet, Christopher Howell, my fellow poetry faculty member here at the MFA at Eastern, is reading tomorrow night with Kathleen Flanagan through Auntie's bookstore. And I believe you can just go to the Auntie's website and they'll have a link for Chris's reading tomorrow night. I'll throw out a question while people are thinking of theirs. And my question has a hidden agenda, and that's to announce Noah's incredible news that he's just received a contract from Algonquin to publish the correspondence between himself and Ross Gay. And I know that we're just really, it's just a remarkable synchronicity that we're reading Ross Gay's book this coming week in workshop, and we read Noah's a month or so ago. And so we're just really thrilled about that. My question for both of you guys is about correspondence. I've had the good fortune with Todd now to be corresponding off and on for about a year. And it's been a wonderfully companionable experience for me. But in light of your correspondence with Ross Gay, Noah, and Todd, we talked in workshop about correspondence and your correspondences over the years. Can you talk about the role correspondence has for you in your writing lives?
You
You want to go first, or oh, okay, okay. Yeah, Dad and I think we talk most every day. Usually, because now we're in two different sets of woods and two different mountain ranges, so we like to tell each other what we see and what we're fishing and hunting. But we also share poems or whatever we're writing, whether it be nonfiction or short stories from me, or and we really do trust each other in a way. It was purely a mentor-mentee relationship for the longest time. And I would give Dad such crappy poems, and he was such a nice teacher, and Dad being like, oh, well, this line's good, but we could do better on the whole thing. But he really helped me, and I know that I became a much better poet much faster because dad took that time with me. And oh my gosh, to be a son, I don't know, to be a son and to already feel indebted to your dad in so many ways, because he was a basketball dad too. And oh my gosh, the amount of free throws that man had to take in the face whenever I was learning how to make free throws. But then to feel indebted in that way, and with poems and how many hours he did with that. But to finally, over the last two years, I think I've finally been able to start to help him with some poems, giving back. And obviously, I don't know, I don't think kids can give their parents back what they've given us. But I hopefully with that correspondence, it started to even out a little bit back and forth.
So Noah's never been a parent yet, so he has no idea that you said, kids can't give back to their parents. It's the exact opposite. My riches are my two boys. That is all there is to it. And so, yeah, Noah and I have a constant correspondence that way, which is very helpful. And it deepens our relationship beyond the poetry. I mentioned to the workshop that I send my poems and correspond with Dave Shoemate, a prose poet, a very fine prose poet, consistently. Katie Hayes, a wonderful poet at Bucknell, probably more like 4 to 6 times a year. So it's not a constant, but she has 2 little boys, and that's one of the reasons. And so she'll block out a week, for example, and then we'll have our correspondence during that week. On a broader sense of what correspondence has done to me, as I mentioned to the workshop, I got going with this whole writing stuff very late because coming from a factory town and my background, I wanted to be a writer, but I thought writers were not actual human beings, and I didn't expect to meet one. And I thought, oh, you become a writer maybe when you're 50 or 60 years old. And so I met my first real writer, Lucian Strike, when I was 26 in grad school, my only creative writing course. And from there, I started to try to correspond with writers, sending notes, just saying how much a book or a poem meant to me, to try to build a literary community. And part of what that correspondence does, and Jonathan mentioned the correspondence he and I have struck up, it just matters so much to me to hear from fellow writers what's resonating in my work, and for me to tell them what's resonating in their work, how it's changing me as a human being, not just as a writer. And again, because I didn't have a writing community, how important it is to have a nod that says, no, you're doing something that matters. And so I'll just tell you one story of correspondence, and that's with David James Duncan. And I think it was after my second book, The Least of These, I sent him a copy of it just to let him know how much my work had meant to me. We had a mutual friend, Chris Dombrowski, who I know some of you folks know. And so Chris said, I really think David would like your work. Send him your book. I said, are you sure? I'd like to, but he said, yeah, absolutely. And I don't forget this kind of generosity, and I try to do it in an honest way when people send me their work. David wrote back a handwritten letter. It's 10 pages long, and he just numbered, 1, and he'd list the title, and he'd write a paragraph about the poem. And he just did that for 10 pages straight. And the generosity of something like that, because again, David has so many demands on his time. He's such a high profile writer, and he's such an activist. And so, I think correspondence is so important on so many levels.
I love it. I'll jump in if that's okay. So Noah and Todd, thank you. And I wonder if you would both answer. I just chose a line from each of your poems. And what does it mean to you from an existential or spiritual aspect? So for Noah, the idea that we're made of water. And then for Todd, muddy feet to walk the rows.
Yeah, I grew up and have continued to form the belief around the scientific fact that there's no more energy today than there was when the universe began. That energy is just constantly changing form, and so. I love that. I just love that idea, and I think that poetry speaks so much to that, to the spiritual belief that we are just always becoming something else. We're not a stagnant thing. The hubris that we are all that we can be, like the individual. This is the highest level that our form can be. Is such a small way of thinking, and so with water, it's one of those things when we look at it just from an elemental standpoint of how necessary and fundamental it is. I remember in second grade going to some wetlands demonstration, and the ranger asked the trick question of like, point to something in the room that doesn't have water. And all of us second graders, we were just fumbling over ourselves and being like, oh, this. And I think she let it go on for like 10 minutes. And she was like, actually, everything has water in it. And we were like, oh, wow. Yeah, that was so rude now, though, thinking back on it. But then in the spiritual sense, you can't look at a holy text without water imagery, and I just love the interweavings of all those different texts with that. And there are so many examples of the body as not as water, but as something fluid. And I think that goes back to always our energy and our form is just constantly changing forever and always. And we need to understand that we are constantly changing forever and always.
Thank you.
I'll piggyback on Noah. We are not our own. And I love how science continues to tell us more and more, right? The microbial life on our skin, in our guts, we are not our own, and we're always being transformed. And of course, we are not our own resonates in so many spiritual traditions. And so, Shan asked about those muddy feet. In Hebrew, Adam is soil. It's also Adam. Of course, Adam is named after that. And if you want a very fine reading of the two Genesis accounts, I would point you to Wendell Berry's Christianity and the Survival of Creation, that essay, because it pushes back on the traditional reading that we have inherited in the Western world that has led to separation from the creation, to the abuse of it, the emphasis on dominion over it, as opposed to looking at what does that word mean in that context. And I would remind you that supposedly in that biblical tradition and Judaism and Christianity, there's dominion over your children. Well, you certainly aren't supposed to injure your child. You're supposed to steward your child. And so the whole idea for me with the mud, and what Barry reminds us of in that essay is that the body isn't a physical thing made of the soil, and then God breathes into it, and the good stuff is God's breath, the soul, and eventually this will do bad things to you and decay, but then the soul will slip out like the envelope. As Barry points out, it's the soil, the Adam, with God's breath, and it is so tightly woven, you can't parse one thing from the other. And so for me, and I'm a spiritual mutt, there are many traditions that influence my beliefs, but for me, that's why the very earth, the very soil is this sacred thing. And isn't it awful that we have created such a mess of the world that there are fewer and fewer places that you and I could actually go barefoot and touch the earth as we were meant to touch it? Instead, we've got needles and glass and on and on and on that can cut our skin. So yeah, muddy feet. I want everybody to get their feet muddy.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't want to
Sorry,
interrupt.
I'm going to jump in for a moment. You talk about muddy feet, and Todd and Noah both, I'm wondering how many of these poems were written while you were in nature rather than behind a computer screen.
Tell them about your
in a
practice
classroom.
on your little book.
Yeah. I always have a little.
Just a second, I gotta shut my microphone off. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I always have a moleskin notebook in my chest pocket or in my pants pocket. And they are constantly wet. They're always
Unmute your
the
microphone.
ink is always blurring and bleeding, and sometimes it's rather difficult to parse out the lines after months, but I do. I don't think I've ever written a full poem while I'm out on the stream or in the woods, but I'm always taking lines down from it and trying to make sure that I'm bringing that essence back to the computer. And I write everything out longhand. Even my long prose is written out longhand first and then transferred, which I think that the longer I keep on writing, hopefully that doesn't atrophy completely, because it's very time consuming to do that. But right now the practice is still working in that way.
And yeah, I like Noah, usually have a journal with me. If I don't have my journal with me, a journal about this size, I have some kind of paper with me. On sabbaticals, I do go sit in the woods, and I have drafted entire poems while I'm in the woods. but when I'm out on sabbatical, to sit for as long as it might take to draft a poem, I don't usually have that kind of time. So it's more, again, movement through the woods like Noah. And hunting season here in Pennsylvania, because we have very thick rhododendron and mountain laurel, you don't stalk the deer the way you might in the West, and you don't take shots from great distances. Quite often, you're within 10 to 15 yards of the animal in very tight places. So you're often up off the ground in a stand, having to sit. And so in those times, I draft things too. Great question, Travis.
Can I hop in with a question?
You
Awesome.
bet.
This is a little abstract, so deal with it however you see fit. I'm curious, do you ever feel like you owe the subjects of your poems something? And not just like in terms of people or groups of people, but like nature and plants and animals and places. Like, do you feel like it's a contract you're signing with them, or do you feel like it's a form of record, or what?
So I'm going to read William Stafford's quote again, just because I love Bill and what he says. But what I believe is all animals have one soul. And, my environmental studies students probably get tired of me, but I really don't see we human animals as anything special. I see us on equal terms. Now, when I say that, and I really appreciate my students who are animal rights activists, but when I say that, sometimes I'll have a student say, well, then how could you kill an animal? And for me, I say, because I don't see myself as different than other animals, I think of ecosystems and the different roles we play. So for example, rabbits, their gestation period is very short and their litters are large because they play a niche role as prey. And so I see we have a role as a predator. Now, I think it's a sacred role, and the way you would take an animal's life is very important. And what you do with that life that you've taken. And eventually, and those who have read my books and the workshop know I talk about how our bodies go back into the earth. What do we owe in the way we put our bodies back into the earth too? So when I say all of that, and I know I get it wrong, and I pray for forgiveness all the time to all the different forms of life, but I try the best I can to do research and to honor the things I'm writing about.
Yeah, I forget. For some reason, I think it's Kierkegaard that says, invest in, this is total paraphrasing, but examine your own salvation with fear and trembling before you look at your neighbor's salvation. And I've really internalized that, not so much in the salvation way, but to look at ourselves and our role as humans and what it means to be a human with fear and trembling, because for all of us on the devices that we're all looking at right now, and then we can enjoy this night of poetry, it takes so much from the earth, and just the amount of life that it takes for our bodies to continue on and to be bodies. And so we need to understand that, and we need to come with that. Maybe fear and trembling is too strong for what we think about in our daily lives, but to understand what it means to be a human and to hold the space on the food chain that we do, in the food web that we do. And so I definitely try to make sure that all of my writing attempts to recognize that and gives respect to the places and creatures that I write about.
Thank you.
I'll just say one thing back to Holly. You know that poem, The Turtle? It's a native species. That would be one of those. I was so distraught, and those who haven't read it, it's about the African-American church in South Carolina where the young man came in and actually spoke with and prayed with the parishioners and then shot them dead. And I felt so strongly I needed to write towards that. And I don't know that what I did was necessarily successful, but this speaks to what Holly asked. You notice I bring non-human lives into that poem as well. And so, Noah said fear and trembling. As I wrote that poem, it was fear and trembling, but I really felt I wanted to somehow say something to honor those lives that were lost.
That's really beautiful. Thank you.
Something I wanted to ask in workshop earlier and then just left my mind was to get kind of both of your takes on assembling a collection of poems, both being at vastly different places in your publishing careers. I just wondered kind of how your most recent books were kind of laid out, how they were, what went into that process, and maybe Todd, how that's changed over time for you.
I remember asking Dad, like coming to Dad with this batch of poems and being like, I think it was like 4 or 5 years worth of poems, and I was like, how long does it usually take you to to form a collection? And he's like, oh, well, like first time it's like 20 minutes. And I was like, what? 20 minutes? And he was like, yeah, you just throw them together. And then he's like, and then it takes like 4 months to really figure it out. And I was like, okay, like perfect. What I came and I have no idea if my other manuscripts are going to end up like this, but Of This River is really, it's a rather novelistic kind of collection, and it does repeating characters. There's character development. There's a semblance of a narrative arc. It is still a book of poems, and it has poems that aren't within that that narrative, but overall it is. And so it was a lot more like picking out chapters and how the chapters fit into the story at large, and so it just took a lot of time, and like I said in the reading, even that one key part, Dad and I Michael McGriff also read the manuscript and gave me feedback on. Ross did, and a couple of my MFA cohort members did, and yeah, Adrian was still able at the 2 weeks before to be like, oh no, you missed this one, so write it. One thing for people that are forming the manuscript, don't be so worried to make it perfect. Even though the book is bound, even though the type is set, your book doesn't have to be a stagnant thing. That artifact isn't going to change, but know that your book doesn't have, your book is still a living thing. Poems are a living thing. William Carlos Williams talks about it being the little machine, right? Yeah. I don't believe they're a little machine. I believe they're a little animal or a little bird, whatever y'all want.
So I grew up in a period in which the very tightly formed book was the anomaly. It was the exception to the rule. So when you think of, and I'm looking up at my shelf where all my Galway Canal books are, The Book of Nightmares is a very tightly conceived book, but that was different than the rest of his books. The proliferation of MFAs, the competition for book prizes, has undone this idea that a poet would write poems over a certain period of time and then look over what she or he has written and then would say, these are the best poems, and yeah, I'll put them in this order, but the order may not necessarily be that crucial, but this is the work of, 3 to as much as 10 years, but this is what I've done. The idea of an occasional poems, right? A collection put together through occasional poems in a sense. As I say, that's changed quite a lot. When I published my first book of poems back in 2002, there still was space, I would say, for early books in people's careers to do more of that traditional work, not being tight, like Noah's first book is so tight. So my first book, I'd say there's still definite themes, and this is where I think I get lucky as a writer. I'm obsessed with many of the same things. There are certain spiritual issues. There are certain issues in the natural world. So putting together a collection's a little easier for me because it's not like, oh, here's a poem about Kanye West. One of my former students in the MFA, when Penn State had the MFA, she wrote an entire collection on Kanye West. So, it's not like, oh, I have a poem about Kanye West, but then I have a poem about deer hunting, and then I have a poem about playing basketball. That didn't happen. So I already had, in a sense, a focus to put together a collection. Noah said 20 minutes. I don't know if it's 20 minutes, but the idea is, so if you've got 50, 60 poems, try to let yourself just play. Start putting them down in a certain order, but you're not sweating it at all. It's the idea that this is the initial order that I'm going to come up with. And that's why, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever. Then keep playing with it. And the idea I have with it is chemical reaction. So, the chemicals that you learn in like 4th grade, baking soda and vinegar, right? And you pour them together and they fizz out. Lots of students for their science project make the paper mache volcano and they put a little food dye in, right? And out it comes. Same thing, your poems are always in conversation with each other. Having said that, I don't know how many of you, when you get a book of poems, you start with the very first poem and read all the way through. I would argue that probably not that many readers do that they skip around in a collection. Maybe once they really love what's going on, maybe they go start at the beginning and read all the way through to see what effect that has on you. I still think you should spend that time and say, how are my poems in conversation with each other? And it's a lot like line breaks. Every time I switch a line break, different work gets done. A dear poetry buddy of mine, Jack Riddle, loves to say there's no such thing as a wrong line break. It's just what work are you getting done with the line break? I think there's a lot to be said. Same thing. It's not that there's a wrong ordering, but what work gets done, what conversations take place. Poems that are close to one another are going to have one kind of conversation. A poem that's 15 pages later may echo something. That's not the same as a conversation right next to each other. It's more like a whisper. Do you remember that I said this? And I love playing it with the orders of books. And then there's the lamentation, and I'm glad Noah reminded us. Nothing will ultimately be perfect. So at some point you just say, okay, I'm going to live with this order, even though I know in living with this order, I'm going to miss out on that. I loved when that poem was next to that, but ultimately, no, it's going to go here. Dropping poems from a collection, that happens too. You love a poem and you think, There was a poem that was supposed to be a native species. It had been published in Arts and Letters. It's called Learning to Tie a Fly. It was a poem that I had dedicated to the Appalachian writer Ron Rash. And ultimately it got dropped. And I was so sad about that. So.
Thank you very much.
I guess I didn't say, I lay all my poems out on the floor.
Oh, yeah.
I lay them all out and then just start doing this thing, you know, moving them closer to each other. And
I have a quick question since we're on kind of organizing. So when you guys get near the end of a collection, you're getting ready to send it off. Do you share the almost complete collection with people to read and look at the order? Or do you just send like maybe 10 and say, hey, look at these 10, what are they doing? Or do you just hand a stack and say, check these out, this is what I'm about to send off, what do you think? Just a lot of us are nearing that point for our thesis, so I think we're just going into uncharted territory. We're all a little nervous about it all. So we just want some advice on what to do over the next 6 months.
Yeah. Oh, you want to go, Dan?
oh, you got it.
Yeah, if you have kind enough people in your lives that are going to read, what 50 to how many pages do y'all have to have for your thesis? Is there a threshold like 48? Yeah. So the most collections, most first book prizes, 48 is the threshold, and then over some, I think like the Miller Williams Prize, they want like 60 pages. But yeah, as long as you have kind enough people to read that many pages, and you can totally preface to be like, I don't want line edits, I just want to see how it's working as a whole. I want to see if you have any comments for where a poem should fit, if a theme isn't being fully realized. All those type of general questions are really, really important. So yeah, as long as you got those friends, send the whole thing, get big picture ideas on it, big picture comments.
Yeah. Now Noah, the last two books, reads the whole thing. Dave Shoemate always reads the whole thing. Katie Hayes always reads the whole thing. Steve Sherrill, who is a novelist, but he went to Iowa Writers Workshop as a poet, reads the whole thing. And then his wife, who's a wonderful poet, Lee Peterson, she reads the whole thing. And they all bring really different strengths. And I'll just say one, Lee Peterson is awesome with line edits. So I know it takes her longer, and I always give her more time. It's factored in, but I know she's going to help me make poems better on the individual line. Whereas Katie might help me with certain concepts in a poem and then ordering more. So.
Yeah, thank you both so much.
Hey, Luke. I don't know if Luke's still here. I'm just wondering when this like moves from Q&A to just like happy hour, which I think are going to be very similar looking.
We're all just going to be staring at each other's beautiful faces.
If there's somebody who's been holding on to a question and they want to type it in the chat, or maybe we'll do one more question and then we'll hand it over, and Holly, you can help us get to know each other.
Perfect.
Anybody have one more question?
I mean, I'll ask one. I have a list of questions I've been typing up, but I just didn't want to like dominate the conversation. It's kind of a question I have for all of our poets. So I'm hoping like it'll trickle over into like my classmates and they'll think about it as well. But is there dissonance between who you are on the page versus who you are in real life? And I laughed so hard and wrote down your quote, Todd, when you said, "A lot of my poems end in sorrow or suffering or death. I get tired of writing such poems." Because that was just astonishingly relatable. But do you feel like you are two different people? Todd on the page, Noah on the page versus, walking amongst your home, amongst the public?
Oh, am I two different folks?
Yeah.
So, Holly, I remember you like Vonnegut. So, Vonnegut suffered from depression. He even tried to take his own life. I don't suffer from depression, but I think, and Noah, you feel free to contradict me, but I think my family knows death weighs on my mind a lot, suffering, where we are in terms of, sixth great wave of extinction. And so a lot of that goes into my poems. But, what I loved about Vonnegut, he recognized you can only weep so long and then you have to laugh. And so that's where I'm very different away from the page. I like very silly bodily humor. So I like to watch Big Mouth. Big Mouth, the 4th season just dropped. So, it's stuff like that I just adore. I like humor that's pretty rough on one hand, but then has a big heart somewhere behind it. And I don't know how to write that stuff as poetry. So I write certain poems, but off the page, I guess I'm different, right, Noah?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I haven't. I don't know. You all could probably tell from like workshop too. Like I love to laugh. I'm a very loud laugher. I've never written a funny poem. Like no fart joke poem. Like